Welcome back to Orthodox Life with Bishop Nikolai. We're going to be doing something a little bit different today. We're going to be talking about me and my life a little bit, not too much to bore you for too long, at least in this episode. And then we're going to be taking some questions and answers that have been submitted to us. So Father Dimitri is going to kind of toss the ball to me, and then I'll do the best I can with the questions.
All right. So Vladyka, I'd like you to tell us about your role as a bishop in this parish, and of course, different kinds of bishops have different roles. There's different titles: metropolitans, patriarchs, archbishops. Can you tell us about what you are?
Well, I'll try. I'm a bishop, and I'm the rector of this parish in Las Vegas. And I've been here now about 12 years. I left the OCA about that long ago. It's more complicated than just that. It's not just when I left and when I came into ROCOR. There was a period of time in there when I had left, but I wasn't still part of ROCOR. And I was placed here in this mission in Las Vegas, and I've been here ever since. And I suspect this is where I'm going to stay until the end. The role of a bishop is much more different than my role here. Most bishops have dioceses. Vicar bishops have responsibilities under ruling bishops, but that's something that we could talk about maybe at a different time. My position here is like any priest would be in any parish. I'm the senior cleric here with you, and we minister to the needs of the faithful of all saints. I really consider myself the only legitimate bishop in exile. I never have accepted the fact that the OCA had retired me, uncanonically, by the way, and so I don't recognize that. But I'm here, and I'm serving, and continue to serve, and thank God for that.
And, why is it important for the Orthodox people to have a relationship with a bishop?
Well, I don't think most Orthodox Christians do. Bishops, for the most part, I think parishes are lucky if they come once a year, maybe on the patronal feast day, when the churches are full, or some special occasion. I remember years ago when I was still a priest in the OCA, and Bishop Tikhon was telling me that a bishop is like a flower pot on a windowsill. They bring you in to make the festivities nicer. He said, then you get back in your car, you go back home, and you wait for the next visit. I never did that when I was a ruling bishop. I felt that it was important to be out among the people and in the parishes, especially to know the priests and their families, because they're the ones who needed the support from the bishop to do their ministry. In Alaska, I was gone on the average 17 days a month, and I stayed in some pretty primitive places most of the time. But that wasn't the point. The point was it was my diocese, and I need to be among the people. So it just depends on bishops. Canonically, there's a canon that says a bishop has to be in his diocese at least 6 months of the year. Most bishops are, but a lot of bishops don't travel. We saw that even during COVID, when so many bishops locked themselves up in their apartments or their mansions or wherever, and didn't go out to serve. And tragically, that had an impact on the church.
Yes, yeah. I think it would be very interesting to people to hear how you got to the point of becoming a bishop. So, starting just with your formation, your early formation as a person, your family life. Maybe you can just talk about that, how you that process.
So this is like a 3-hour series? Well, that's a long story, actually. I started out in the Serbian church, born and raised with a Serbian mother and father in Butte, Montana. A very old parish. The first church was consecrated in 1905 by St. Tikhon when he was the Archbishop of North America. So it's a very old and traditional parish. And I had good mentoring from the clergy who came in. And there were many clergy. I think during my time growing up, there were probably, from the time I was a child until my teen years, maybe there were 4 or 5 priests. They changed regularly. In fact, at the 75th anniversary of the parish, there were 50 priests who had served that parish. The shortest was 1 month, and the longest was the priest who was there at that time, who in 4 different assignments to the same parish had been there almost 20 years, but he was only counted as one. So it's kind of interesting fact. I was ordained a deacon and a priest in Butte, Montana, my home parish. Ordained a deacon there and a priest. I was ordained in Los Angeles. And then I came to Billings, Montana as my first parish. And I was there for about 6 years. And then I went and did postgraduate studies in Belgrade. And then I came back to Las Vegas to start the Serbian parish here. And then our bishop died in 1986 or 87, I think, 86, Bishop Gregory, of blessed memory. And everything was pointing to me to be the successor. And everything happens that could happen to go wrong. Right away they start attacking you because some people want you, some people don't want you. I've been very open about the fact that there were 5 Masons who met in San Diego, and I could name them and tell you from where they came. And they said that he'd be dangerous as a bishop, and they were right. I would have been. I left the Serbian church, came to the OCA through the Greek archdiocese, by the way. I served the Greek church here for a year because the bishop didn't want to let me go to the OCA because he said that they'll come after me like they did you, and I want to be patriarch. And that kind of blemished my sense. This bishop was someone that I really looked up to as a mentor and as an example of the faith, and I really felt like he compromised, that position in my sense. I went to Belgrade and did the postgraduate work there, and it wasn't for me to stay in an ethnic diocese again. I didn't want to do that. I had no contact with any OCA church or any OCA parish ever in my life. The OCA priest who was in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, where I was going to school, never participated in any of the pan-Orthodox festivities. So I never had that contact. The first contact I had with an OCA parish was in Seattle when I was starting the Serbian parish there. 1 month we served in the St. Spiridon Cathedral of the OCA, and I thought, this is great. There were no pews. The priest came, introduced himself. They had vigil services on Saturday night. And then I remember going back, my first visit to the Serbian church, to the diocesan assembly, and the priests were criticizing me. Why do you have vespers on Saturday night? These were old priests. They could be my fathers. And I said, well, because I can't do vigil. They said, no, why are you trying to set some kind of standard? They were giving me a hard time because none of them had vespers. And even vespers was 45 minutes, hardly something to complain about, right? But those are kind of little things that you look back at. My introduction to the OCA was here in the Diocese of the West, where it was a very traditional, very Russian-like diocese, and I was very comfortable here. And then I thought, I'm coming to a big church, and no one's going to bother me again. The numbers of single clergy to be bishops is very low in the Orthodox Church, so the pickings are kind of short. And I thought, well, they're not going to bother me. Well, that was in 1988. By 1992, I was number 1 on the short list. There were 2 lists, a short list and a long list. And then the plan was to consecrate me as a vicar bishop in 1994 and make me the Metropolitan's vicar in New York. And Bishop Innocent was a priest at that time, was going to be sent to Alaska to be the vicar of the Metropolitan. And Sergius Gherkin was going to be the bishop at St. Tikhon's Seminary and Monastery. Bishop Tikhon and I managed to talk the Metropolitan out of that. And I thought, well, I was saved again. And then over the years, the same thing. The Metropolitan made 2 visits here to ask me to be his vicar. And all the times I just felt that I wanted to stay in my parish and take care of my people. So we were in Billings, Montana for the Feast of St. Nikolai Soraich in March. And it was a week before Holy Synod was meeting. And they were going to be electing a bishop for Alaska. And at dinner one night, Father John Anderson was the retired priest there. He asked Bishop Tikhon, he said, Vladyka, can someone turn down being a bishop if they're elected. And Bishop Tikhon kind of sat back and he said, well, of course, unless you're a monastic, then you have to accept out of obedience. Okay, that was fine. I was getting things ready in the church on Wednesday because of pre-sanctified Wednesday evening, and my deacon came in and said that Father Kondratik was on the phone calling for me. So I answered the phone in kind of a funny way because we were friends. And he was very serious. He says, I have Bishop Seraphim, secretary of the Holy Synod, who wants to talk with you. Well, I knew exactly what that was. He said that the Synod had elected me to be the Bishop of Baltimore, vicar to the Metropolitan, to take care of the needs of Alaska. Would I accept? I conveyed to him that conversation that happened on that Sunday or Saturday in Billings, and I said, only because of that do I accept. And that's how I became a bishop and went to Alaska. As a vicar bishop, I was only supposed to go there for a short time to get Bishop Innocent, who would have some problems, to get him in order so that he could run the diocese properly. From the time I was there in, I guess it was June 21st I got there, longest day of the year, and it was broad daylight at midnight, until May 6th when he died. He refused to meet with me. And then I was elected to be the bishop of Alaska because they needed a vote for the next metropolitan. The vote was 4-4 between Archbishop Herman and Bishop Seraphim. And they knew that I wouldn't vote for Bishop Seraphim. So I was made a ruling bishop, therefore had a vote. And then there's lots more to that story and leaving of Alaska. But that's maybe for another time. This is already probably too boring. Pretend like it's not.
Right.
Well, he's a priest. You asked about my upbringing. My father came to this country in 1909. He came from Herzegovina, which is part of now Serbia. At that time, it was Yugoslavia. His oldest brother, was here. My father was the youngest in the family, and his oldest brother was here, and just came here to make some money. And the plan was to make money, go back home, and help out with the family. So he paid for my father to come. He tells us the story. He spent 30 days in the hull of a ship coming to America. And he didn't remember how many days he stood in line at Ellis Island. But years ago, they had this opportunity that if your family came through Ellis Island, you could put a plaque there. So I ordered the plaque, and it's there at the Statue of Liberty on Ellis Island. He ended up getting married and having one child. And then he had a second child, and that child died in the flu of 1918. And it was pretty devastating to him. He wanted to have more children. And he found out that his wife was having abortions. And so he left the family, left his daughter and his wife, and ended up going to Red Lodge, Montana, where he worked in the coal mines. Before that, he was in Arizona, Bisbee, Arizona. And when he first got off the boat, he was in New York and then went to Chicago, which is a huge Serbian, colony there. There's a story when he would have stayed in Arizona, in Bisbee, but he and a friend stole horses of some Mexican bandit whose name was Pancho Villa. And when they found out who he was, they took off, and that's why they went to Wyoming. And he worked there for years in Wyoming. Then he came to Red Lodge, Montana, working in the coal mines there. And then finally to Butte, Montana, where he met my mother. And my mother was 25 years younger than my father. And they got married, and I was the first child. There were 3 of us. And she'd had a couple of miscarriages that were, brought back memories for my dad. My mom had a difficult time with that. And then she died of cancer very early on. So they both went to church. They were church people. My father was very active in the church. He was the secretary of the parish. In those days, the secretary of the parish was the most important officer of a church because they dealt with all the correspondence from the diocese, with anything legal that was going on. The presidents always changed whichever group was in. They picked their friends, and that's who was changed. My dad stayed in that position for many, many years and just stepped aside as his own decision. even working the mines. He always went to church. The only time that my dad didn't go to church was when they had shift changes and they were moving things around, or they were working for longer hours. But both parents went to church. My mother was the president of the Young Mothers Club, which was an organization for the church school to help the kids program. And then there was the other older ladies that had the Circle of Serbian Sisters. So I was raised in a very Orthodox family.
Did you always feel? Were you always pious as a child, or was there a particular time that something happened and you started to be more pious?
You're leading people to believe that I'm pious. Okay, that's okay. I was more pious then. When I was a little boy, my grandmother gave me this plastic cross. It was about this big. And I would take a plate, and I'd cut pieces of bread on that. And I'd take a dish towel. In those days they had those flour sacks, I think, and put it on my shoulders. And I'd go around, give it to everybody, kiss the cross and my hand, and I'd give them a piece of bread. And I remember doing that when I was just a little kid. So I always wanted to be a priest. That was in my heart. My dad was not in favor of that. In fact, right up until a few months before I went to seminary, he thought I was going to pharmacy school. I had my mother's youngest brother had a pharmacy in San Pedro, California, which was right down the road from Marineland. Doing very, very well. They offered to pay for my schooling and also to give me a partnership in the store once I graduated. But that was never in my mind. My dad and I didn't have much of a relationship for a year, but I was in seminary most of that time. But, he got over it. And he told me this. He said, if you were going to be a priest in the old country, I'd support that 100%. He said, in this country, I just can't support that. There's no respect for the priest. And again, remember, as I told you, 75 years of the Butte Parish, there were 50 priests. So he knew things were awful in those days. I mean, I remember some of those meetings that were just raucous fights and just terrible stuff.
Yeah.
Not very churchly.
And so when you went to seminary, this is a seminary that doesn't exist today. Can you tell us a little bit about how that was? It might be interesting for people to know, compare it to the current seminaries that are out there today.
Yeah. The priest in my parish at that time, who was my spiritual father for many years, at one time in the late 50s and 59 to 62, I think, something like that, he was the prefect of Christ the Savior Seminary in Johnstown, Pennsylvania. So when I was getting ready to go to seminary, there was a push, where would I go? And he wanted me to go to Christ the Savior because it was very strict, very organized. He thought it was a good place to be. The other choice was St. Vladimir Seminary, which was kind of the uppity school. And so I just went where he wanted me to go. And I'm not sorry that I went there. It doesn't exist anymore. It was part of the Carpatho Russian Diocese. It had no accreditation. And even when I came back to Montana, where I needed a secular job, I was working at first as a parole officer, juvenile parole officer for the state. Then I took a job as assistant principal in Catholic high school. And in order to move up in administration, you had to have a master's degree. So I went to the local state school there. Eastern Montana College is what it was called then. It's now part of the university system. And I had a really fine, I don't know what you call those people nowadays, advisor. And he said, the school wasn't recognized. And I was very open about that from the very beginning. So he was I think he was a Roman Catholic, so he was very helpful to me. He said, I can set up so that you can challenge your courses. And if you can challenge your courses and keep it at a B level for the first year, we'll take you into the graduate program. That's what I did. There was no issue at all. And so I managed to do that. And I got my master's degree and was offered the job as a principal at high school, but I was waiting for that, I had tuition to go to Belgrade for postgraduate, which is what I was wanting to do. So that's where I went. I'd like to mention one thing maybe, that 30 years as a priest, I worked secular jobs to support myself in my missionary work. And when I decided to go into missionary work, it was because I became a monastic. And I'll go back and give you a little bit of story there too. I had no intentions of ever being a monastic. I was dating a young lady in the parish in Johnstown, Pennsylvania, and we'd already gotten to the point now after 2 years that we're talking about, now getting engaged, and then of course after graduation getting married. And I was getting ready to go home for a Christmas vacation. I was visiting at their home, and she told me that she couldn't be a priest's wife. She wanted to be my wife, but couldn't be a priest's wife. And I knew what the problem was. The problem was the priest's wife in that parish was perfect. She was the most ideal priest's wife that you could ever have in a church. She was everywhere. You never heard her talking about anybody or talking in any possible way. She raised their 2 children, actually, post-war Yugoslavia. In fact, Father Vladyka didn't even see his kids until they were teenagers. So she'd raised those kids, and they were wonderful. Both of them became executives and were again, church people, just like they were. And they treated me very well when I was there in the parish. So I came home. In 1965, my mother had breast cancer. And in those days, they said, at 5 years, you're cured. Well, this is 1969 in December when I came home. And she waited to tell me that she was going to see the doctor, wanted me to go with her. So we went to the doctor's office, and she went back to the room, and I drove her there, and all of a sudden she just breaks out crying, and I went in the room, and the doctor says she's got less than 3 months to live. So that then made me think, now what do I want to do? Where do I want to go? Which direction do I want to go? The bishop knew me since I was a little boy. The priest the same. And my whole goal in life was to be a priest. So since I was dumped, I thought, well, I've got to move on. So I petitioned the bishop to be ordained. I took monastic vows and was ordained a deacon on August 9th, 1970. The feast of St. Pantaleimon is the feast on which I was actually ordained. It also became the feast day of St. Herman of Alaska, which we can talk about a little bit later. But during those years when we were talking about this Russian church, the Metropolia, now becoming the Orthodox Church in America, we were laughing about this at seminary. Who do they think they are? Churches only come from the old country, Russia, Greece, Serbia. It just didn't make any sense to any of us. We made fun of that. Who would think that 30 years later I'd be the caretaker of the relics of St. Herman? So I was ordained, and then I was a deacon for 2 years to finish my seminary, and then went to my first parish.
And did you take your monastic vows before your mother died?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The monastic vows were the evening before the vigil, and then I was ordained a deacon the next day. Yeah. And there were 3 bishops there, actually. There were very few monastics in the Serbian church. I think I mentioned that, there were 4 or 5 of them or 6 of them that were American-born. Priest in my parish was one of those. And so the bishops would have these episcopal meetings in different places all over North America. And they chose Butte, Montana to have that and to do the ordination at that time and the tonsure. So that's how that came about.
Mm-hmm. What was your mother's reaction to this?
Oh, she was very, very pleased.
Yeah.
Yeah. She was very pleased until the very end.
Mm-hmm.
She always supported me. My father was, at that point, he and I had, reconciled everything. Everything was fine with him. He knew that's what I wanted, and that's the direction we're going, so everything was fine. When I say to the end of that, we'll talk about that sometime.
The next question I have is: Do you feel that God was moving you in some way from your earlier years to guide you into the priesthood? Do you feel that he was putting things in your way, or in some way guiding you this way?
Well, I never thought about that. Really thinking about that now. He was always there. No matter what was going on in my life, the temptations that were there, it was always, that was still the direction, and I still had to stay focused on which way I was going. There's some other more particular things that I'm planning to put in my memoirs about that. But he was always there to protect me, to not fall, to at least keep me in a position where I could be as worthy as possible for an unworthy human being to be. So I think that, as time passed, I became more close, I think, to the Mother of God, of course. Once my mother died 3 months after I was ordained. So the Mother of God became really my mother in every possible way, as she is even, to this moment, as she is for every monastic. But then there are other saints, too, in my life, and we could talk about some of that at some point, too.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell us about your connection with your patron saint? Do you feel, what do you feel has, sorry, I'm going to have to just cut that out, let's see.
Just don't cut me out.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm still the star, right? Okay. Welcome to Orthodox Life with Father Dimitri, and his guest today is Bishop Nikolai.
Yeah.
Don't get any ideas.
Maybe
trying
you
to
can
make it easier for you.
Yeah.
It's not working, is it?
No. Yeah. Could you tell us about your connection that you have with your patron saint?
Sure. In the Serbian church, you have a family, Slava, a family patron saint. And then you have your own personal saint. So I was always kind of blessed, I felt, to have St. George, the great martyr, as my family saint who was watching over all of us, and me too, and have St. Nicholas, who was a star of the Ecumenical Council. And he was always there for me in my life. In fact, I wear a medallion of St. Nicholas a lot of the time, sometimes one of St. George, depending. Thursdays are St. Nicholas, so that's with the cross today. But that closeness, I think, was always there because we were taught that our Slava was such an important event, that it was a holy day. And then to have your own patronal feast day just added to that. It was kind of lower than the Slava, but it was still particular to you, and it was only yours because my father and I had the same name.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you feel that there are other saints that you feel a close connection to?
Sure,
Mm-hmm.
Sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I used to travel to Serbia, and there were two saints that were special to me. One was St. John Maksimovic, before he was a saint, by the way, because he was already that holy man that was obvious that he was going to be canonized. And I would travel to San Francisco if I was going to Serbia, to when his relics were in the basement of the church, to pray there. And then in Serbia, I would go to Ostroג, to St. Vasilija, St. Basil of Ostroג. St. Basil of Ostroג had a very close connection to my family. The village where my father was born and raised is right next to the village where St. Vasilija lived and was born and raised, where his mother is still buried there today, and they just canonized her this year. So those two became very, very particular to me. St. Herman, when I went to Alaska, became special to me because, here he is, the first saint in America, and to learn his life and his sacrifices that he made. He was the last of that delegation of 10 monastics who came. Was never a priest or a deacon, just a monastic, and kept his monastic life and touched the people there so closely. Later on, St. Nectarius became special to me when I was, before this, when I was in seminary. I was visiting a priest friend in upstate New York, and this family just came back from Egina, and they brought this little icon and had a relic of St. Nectarius in there, and I'd just been ordained hieromonk, and they gave me this icon, and I was just taken back by the fact that they would give me this icon with this relic in it. I still have it in my prayer corner. And St. Nectarius became very special. I mean, I thought when things were really bad in Alaska, that St. Nectarius was going to solve that issue. And it didn't happen. And I thought, gee, all these years, I felt I was faithful to him and kept him in my, in my special heart, and I never realized that it was later on when I got prostate cancer, how important St. Nectarius became, because he died of prostate cancer. So when you think that it's something that should be for you, it's not the way God has it planned. It's in his plan, his way. So St. Nectarius became special to me. And as I said, I was ordained on the feast of St. Panteleimon. These are great saints of the church. So I feel like as they watch over me, and there are some others too, but these in particular I feel very close to.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What kind of things would you say really helped you be ready for being clergy in the church? And then also I'd like to know, what kind of things do you feel like you weren't really adequately prepared for beforehand?
Oh yeah, that's a good one. Yeah. I think that the best preparation for me to be a Serbian Orthodox priest was my laughing at Rocky drinking water. Drinks like a horse. My father, as I told you, wasn't in favor of that. And I told him that I will never allow them to treat me poorly. He said, you'll never have that choice. And I think that prepared me more than anything. It stiffened me up. You're not going to get to me. And I have to say that that drive is what allows me to be here today. Because there have been many, many attacks against me to destroy me by bishops, by priests, and by lay people. Less lay people than the clergy, to be honest. So I think that's really what strengthened me, and to keep focus of what a priest is. I lived almost 3 different kind of lives most of my 30 years as a priest, because I was a priest, of course, in my life, ordained as such, but I had to work a secular job, which was 8 hours a day. But I worked a secular job and never missed a service. I worked it out so that I was there for any holy days or any like Holy Week. I would take time off even without pay until I had accumulated enough leave time to do that. And I got 3 different degrees during those 30 years. That master's in Montana. I got an MBA in Las Vegas, because when I was working in a psychiatric hospital, you had to have an MBA or an MPA to move up in the administration. And I was the director of the adolescent unit, and the administrator I knew would be leaving because they always wanted bigger hospitals, and I was going to stay here. So I got my MBA, and as soon as I got my MBA, they changed the rules. You couldn't be promoted in your own hospital. So I went into private practice at that point, but nonetheless, and then I did my doctorate when I was here. That was all the first 30 years, and then I've done nothing since. Just roaming around. That's a joke. You're not laughing. Oh. You're not crying either, though. That's good.
Yeah. Can you tell us about what experiences stand out to you as being, especially from your past as since you were ordained? What experiences were the most valuable in your mind?
As a priest or a bishop?
Well, let's start with deacon and priest, and then
Sure.
we'll talk about bishop. Yeah.
Yeah. The best opportunity I had as a deacon was when I was in seminary, and Bishop Sava's deacon was ordained a priest, and he had no deacon for maybe a year until he got a new deacon coming from the old country. And even prior to that, I was serving with him most of the time on weekends. A lot of the time, most of the time probably. And then I became his deacon, in reality. That was an amazing experience, because this was a man who was well educated. He should have been the next patriarch. He was always wore a cassock, had a long beard, no one messed with him. And they were messing with him. And he had nothing. In those days, those bishops had nothing because the Serbian church was split. They had no residence or anything. So to have that time with him, and he was a doctor of liturgics, which really helped me, because we go to the Nikolaiski Typikon, which we did on a regular basis in my visits together with him. So it really formed me in that sense to know what to do in the church, how to do it. And of course, I idolized him until, of course, that time he said that he didn't want to let me go because he wanted to be patriarch. That kind of bothered me, even to this day. But I'm sure I've disappointed people too over the years. And then as a priest, as a deacon too, the priest in that parish, the Serbian parish, where I went on the weekends, was just superb. He was just a real priest. He had no voice. I mean, his voice was, he described his voice as a rusty nail down a washboard. And he would laugh, and the choir director would laugh. He said, but he stayed on pitch. They were wonderful people. So I had that experience of watching him. And one thing that he taught me was he had a huge mortgage on his property. And he said, you've got to keep these people busy. They're like mules. If they're pulling the weight, they're quiet. If they're not, they're going to come after you. So it was kind of cute. So that was a good experience. As a priest, I was on my own. I went to Billings, Montana, 23 years old. There was no other church for 240 miles away. You got to start everything all by yourself. That last year before I went there, I'm collecting different things like a gospel and a tabernacle and hand cross and these old ragged vestments and vestments for altar servers, and which I didn't have in the beginning. You really had to make do. So as a priest, you did that. And then I was the youngest priest in the diocese. So when we had diocesan meetings, you get a chance to meet some of these men that were, you saw what they did. You saw what they built. You saw the sacrifices they made. It was inspiring. Yeah. My own priest that I chose, my spiritual father, he built 2 churches, which was one in San Francisco and one in Butte, which was a big sacrifice to make. He had a PhD at Johns Hopkins, and he was undermined by his brother priest because they didn't want him to be bishop. Well, they're all married and had kids. Why would you undermine him? Because they wanted to be bishop. And what happened was, the man who became bishop, his wife died and he became bishop, who was also his cum. They were actually related, in the church. It was a tragic thing. It happens all the time. Such insecurity. So, as priests, there were lots of good examples. Father Roman Braga, a very, great history, a Romanian priest who spent time in the gulags. I got to know him very well in Rives Junction outside of Detroit, where he was there living at the monastery, where his niece was the abbess. I mean, to be in the presence of those people. I met Father Justin Popovich. I served with him at the monastery in Chelia in 1978. Later on to become a saint. I mean, just that experience of being close to people like that is pretty amazing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about when you became bishop? What kind of course, you had a certain number of years that you were ruling the diocese in Alaska, and then of course after that, you were attacked. And kicked out. In all of this,
we use the word exiled.
Yeah, exiled. Yes. What are some lessons that you learned?
When I was consecrated in 2001 in Dallas, Texas, this is one of those things that I mentioned earlier about what Bishop Tikhon said about, inviting the bishop, and he's like a flower pot just to make the event nicer. And honestly, that was part of that. They were consecrating the cathedral there on Saturday, and I was consecrated on Sunday. Should have been, in my opinion, consecrated here in Las Vegas, in the church that I built. At that time, it was the largest parish in the diocese. It was a thriving parish. The metropolitan was going on sick leave, so that was the excuse to move it along. But, the one thing that I remember there that reminded me what my life would be like at the end of the consecration service. And we showed that video here, the trapeza. And at the end of the liturgy, the bishop is taken to the center of the church with his mantia and given the dikiri and trikiri to bless the four sides. And the cameras were clicking and the flashes going. And I couldn't help but think in my mind then that that's what it would have been like at Christ's crucifixion with the paparazzi. And it came to be. It did in time. And over the years, it's been that way. So, but what does that change? It doesn't change anything. You have to be who you are. You have to stand for what you believe. And if you're doing what's right, you'll be blessed. If you're not, well, damnation can come to anybody. So, I had good bishops. Bishop Tikhon was a really excellent example. Bishop Sava. Bishop Tikhon's worst downfall was he didn't visit his parishes, but I was a chancellor of the diocese and I did that. And I met a lot of bishops over the years. Bishops, I think they had 10 bishops, different bishops visited Alaska while I was there during those years. And then, of course, being exiled from the diocese was very painful and very, very, I was angry for a long time. Yeah.
So when they attacked you in Alaska and, it led to kicking you out, it must have been, of course, extremely painful, difficult to go through all of this. Did you find yourself getting close to the line of giving up?
Well, maybe. It was an awful period in my life. Dark. I was being attacked continually on the internet. No one ever attacking me face to face. And when I finally, demanded a canonical court, they retired me, which I had no right to do, which, as I said earlier, I don't accept, and I won't ever accept that. It took them 6 years to release me, if you can imagine. And during that 6-year period, whole process of trying to do everything they could, they sent me out with no means of support, but no means of support whatsoever. I had to live on my own. I went to Australia, and Bishop Irene, the Serbian bishop in Australia, was very kind to me. He invited me there, and actually invited me there before I got kicked out. He contacted me and he says, get out of there. He said, I know those people. They're awful. He went to St. Vladimir's. Well, okay. I didn't do that. I stuck it out. So when I did go to Australia, he was very kind to me. Even wrote his diocese that I'm a visitor and to be treated as if it were he himself visiting, and I could visit any parish anytime, visit, asking for a visit or not. But that's how, and it was great. Then we eventually split the diocese, and I was serving the Melbourne area. He was serving the Sydney area. I came back to the States because they messed up my immigration papers, and the immigration. He's not an attorney, but it's a special position in Australia. Immigration is really, really technical there. And some monk at the monastery did my papers. He said, they'll never take you. He said, you need to leave the country, come right back. He said, just, go to New Zealand, come back the next day, and we'll start over. Well, I was going to Serbia, so I came back to Las Vegas, and I was here, and I was serving the Serbian church, and one of the doctors there, husband and wife, were both doctors. He said, oh, come in and for a physical before you go to Serbia. I said, what for? Perfect health. He said, I know I've got a new ultrasound. I want to use it on someone who's healthy before I do it on my patients. So I went in and did the blood work, and he called me back after a day or so, and he said, what was your PSA last time? I said, it was high. It was 6. He said, it's 59. And I laughed. I said, you mean 5.9? He said, no, it says 59. He said, but that can happen. He said, we'll just take it again just to be sure. Okay. And no symptoms. The next week came back and it was 68. And he got me into a urologist the next Monday. They were friends. I had an MRI, I had biopsies. I had Thursday off. I remember this vividly. I went in Friday, and the doctor said, "You've got less than 2 months to live. It's stage 4. It's in your lymph glands." And I thought, "Oh, this is great. I can die." And that's how I felt. So this is relief finally from this misery that I've had these last couple of years that were just awful. And so my deacon went in with me to the doctor because I didn't want there to be any secrets about this. And then we came out of that doctor's thing, and he said, the doctor said, "I made an appointment with the best oncologist that there is, but he's on vacation. He won't be back for 3 weeks, but I'm going to give you a shot." And it was Lupron, and I saw that doctor, and there's another story to that too, but he's been my doctor for 16 years. So the deacon says, "Oh, isn't this great? This is like that sermon where, the flood, and they send the Jeep, and the people say, 'Oh no, God's going to save us.' And then they send the boat, and, 'Oh no, God's going to save us. It's going to be fine.' They send a helicopter on top of the roof, and they drown. They go to St. Peter. He says, they said, 'Well, we thought God would save us.' What? We sent you a Jeep, we sent you a boat, we sent you a helicopter." So he said he thought this was great, that this was like my GP, my urologist, and my oncologist. So at that point, then I thought, now what do I do? So I agreed to have treatment. It was 2.5 years of treatment that time. So that's 4 bouts of cancer, all 3 of which were stage 4, and 1 was stage 3. So yeah, there was a dark time, very dark. The treatment, that 2.5 years was awful. It was painful. It didn't let up, and so I still withstood it. Not on my own. Yeah. And I think now we're gonna finish this, right? And I think if people have more questions about some of these things that they've heard, they can send them in, and we can answer those later on too. But we've got a couple of good Q&As that a couple of Q's we want to give good A's to. The Q is for questions, and A is for answers. Why don't I ask you those questions?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Serious, huh? Okay. How should someone discern if they should go to seminary beyond just a long-time desire?
I think that people should be people that are interested in the idea of becoming clergy should be having just a lot of interaction with other clergy, and trying to get a feel for what does it mean to be a priest, or if they're seeking to, if they're considering just the idea of being a deacon, what does it mean to be a deacon? You have to be grounded in attending services. That's the beginning of even having a feel of what does it mean to be clergy. I mean, the services are central. So, somebody that's just been baptized, say, he's not probably ready to be able to make that, take that direction. I mean, there's exceptions, of course. Seminary can go on. Seminary takes years, and in that time you can also be developing and figuring things out to see if if it's the right path for you to become a priest or a deacon. But I would recommend that, generally speaking, you should take time before even going to seminary. Assuming that you haven't grown up in the church, knowing how all these things go, take some time just to feel that out, and get to know yourself better, because it's important that clergy know their own limits. Are you capable of making this commitment as a clergyman? Because it's a commitment. It's just like when we're baptized, it's a commitment to living according to Christ. Well, becoming clergy, it's a commitment to serving him in a more, just a more intensive way.
Yeah, I remember, when I went to seminary, it was very normal to be ordained in your 20s. It was normal. And over the years, that number has gotten higher, and especially even with people with late vocations, late callings. Again, they've been grounded in the church and participating, and that's so important because it's a different life. You know, you're called to do more, and it's not like you go on vacation. There's no vacation. I remember having conversations with Bishop Tikhon about particular candidates, men who wanted to go to seminary, who were doing all the things you were saying, and he would say, "Well, I don't think he's of the caliber of a priest," and I always took the position that, you know, let the seminary make that decision, because that'll happen. And when I went, there were 7 of us in my class. Only 2 of us graduated together. 3 of us graduated together, but there were 7 who started. You're weeded out the first year or 2. And that's what happened in that case too. So
sure. Yeah, and then going to seminary, of course, it gives the opportunity to be tested. And, you know, say, you know, your priest, he knows you, what you've been doing, you know, through your life in the church, but but people can always step it up too. And so, you know, it's a good reason to, you know, not be too, you know, not to be too discouraging to people to try it out, a man that's interested in trying it.
Yeah. Well, we have these other programs now for late vocations, you know, where people can actually do these online courses and then some other on-campus things for the diaconate especially. I'm not sure about much of that for the priesthood, but for the diaconate for sure. But that mentorship is very important, to have that relationship with your priest so you know, what is he doing? How is this being handled? You know, those things are crucial if there's going to be any success in your ministry. Yeah. How does one know if they were actually blessed with celibacy and not just content or indifferent to marriage? With the question, I'm assuming someone is chaste and still has obvious natural inclinations toward the opposite sex. The question's not real clear, but I think the answer to that, I think the question is basically, you know, should I be looking for someone to be married, or do I think the celibacy is better for me? I will speak personally what I think the rule is, and that is either marriage or monasticism. I just do not at all, you know, advocate celibacy. It's a Roman place of clergy, and it's just not something we should do. You need to dedicate yourself totally being a married priest or being a monastic priest. And you'll know when the right person comes, I think. You know, I told my story a few minutes ago, and, you know, I never saw that girl ever again. Mm-hmm. And I attended that parish for 2 more years.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I wonder if also, I don't know if the question might pertain also just to people and even besides clergy,
yes,
just in general. Yeah.
Sure.
And I mean, I think that, you know, we should be trying to figure out one way or the other, you know, of becoming a monastic or becoming married, mm-hmm. you know, because both of those are commitments, and we're really being pretty non-committed. We're not committing ourselves if we go just many years. You know, there's a level that's acceptable where you're trying to find what is pleasing to God in your life, but you know, sometimes it happens with people that they don't, they're not willing to commit themselves in one way or the other. And this is, of course, that's what's not healthy, that non-commitment. You know.
Usually those people aren't committed to anything. That's my experience. You know, you see that, you know, with people who've gone on, and some people are just not meant to be married either. And some of those are very happy. But then there are those others who aren't happy because they never made a commitment. And that's too bad. It's time lost. What are common means of work that priests do in the secular world to support their families? Well, what do you do?
I do woodworking. I roast coffee.
Milk goats.
Milk goats. Yeah. I sell a little bit of the dairy from the goats. Yeah, I mean, I know priests, there's priests that need to support themselves partially, through secular work. I mean, it can be any kind of work. I mean, besides, of course, sinful, honorable work. Yeah. I mean, it can be anything, whether it's being a doctor, whether it's being, it can be just at a factory. I mean, it doesn't really matter at the end of the day, as long as it's supporting the family and you're able to serve as a priest.
Yeah. I remember one meeting we had here at the Serbian church. At that time I guess I was probably working as the director of that adolescent unit in the hospital. And this one fellow said, why can't you just be satisfied with pumping gas? I looked across the table. This other guy wanted to punch him in the face. And I said, you'd rather have your priest pumping gas at a gas station instead of having some honorable position in a psychiatric hospital dealing with children, maybe even your child? Really? He was one of those detractors of that I mentioned to you. And as we were taping earlier, and he apologized to me actually at one point in the elevator at City Hall, going up to get plans for St. Paul. He said, I don't believe in anything. The only thing I believe in is being Serbian. There was nothing against you personally. He said, I think you were an honorable person, but didn't think you fit here because Serbian wasn't first for you. And it wasn't. Orthodoxy was. But what's your opinion of children wanting to go to church and converting to Orthodoxy, but their parents are not allowing them because they hold them back? What shall they do? We've had that experience. Mm-hmm. Yeah. We've had several of those here actually over the years.
Yeah, right. Well, it's not a very clear question. Yep.
I think it comes down to, we've had young people here who've been underage, who started coming to church, 4 or 5 of them that I can think of. And what we've done is we've always talked to their parents. Once they make the commitment that they say this is where they want to come, we always make it a point to meet with their parents. So the parents know that we're normal people. Invite them to a service. Most of the parents are pretty uncomfortable because it's something they're not used to, because they're probably not going to church either. And you have that. We had one young man where his father was just adamant that he could not come. He would lie to his parents to say he was going to the library or something on Sunday morning. I said, you're going to have to tell them they know you're going to church. He smells from incense, right? I mean, how could not? And of course, when he did tell them, they knew. And they were fine with that afterwards. But by that time, he was an adult too. But it's a hard thing. And is it, why are they coming to church? Amazing to see these young people who are coming now. These are a lot of them in their teens, who are researching on their own and wanting to be here. There's 7 different Orthodox churches. They picked this one for them in particular. I'm sure the other churches have the same thing. Mm-hmm. But it's just amazing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The thing is, maybe just as a word of advice to young people that are in this situation, that their parents don't support it and, they're having difficulty coming to church because of that. I mean, of course, eventually they're going to have the freedom to come on their own as much as they want. And the important thing is just to commit in themselves to keep pursuing getting closer to God. They can still, learn about praying,
Orthodox prayers, right?
They can read about it, of course. I mean, they can keep it. The point is they can hold it in their hearts.
That's right.
And it's only a temporary time these years.
Exactly. Yeah. What do you have to say to those who can't go to church or pray because they're not close to an Orthodox church? What would you say to people for that?
Mm-hmm. Well, they need to, have the outlook of making life more practical, making it more practical to get to the church. It's not something we should settle for that, well, I live an hour and a half away from church, so I guess I just, but I really like my home, but if it means that you aren't able to get to the services on a regular basis, this is a bad decision. I mean, there's no justification for that kind of thinking. You're being worldly. You're putting
it's the same thing for jobs.
And jobs too. That's
when you're looking for a job, I just sent somebody a quotation from Tito Collender and saying that, be satisfied with your place in life. Elevated positions don't make you any better. They're more distractions. And I think that's really critical. A couple of things I think that bother me when people think that church is a dating service. They're here and they're looking for a spouse. Well, that's not why you should be coming to church. If it happens that comes about, that's because God bless that. But the priority is church first. And that needs to be the first place to look.
Yeah, and I wanted to mention also just about specifically for Sundays, sometimes their jobs don't allow them to come to work on Sunday, to church on Sunday. And, this is something that you just absolutely need to give up. You cannot, this is displeasing to God to take work over honoring him on Sunday. And it also translates the same on a Saturday evening service. If our excuse to miss the services in the evening, for Sunday is because of our job, then we are putting work before God. I mean, this is on Saturday evening, it is the beginning of the Sunday worship, the celebration of Sunday. Our liturgical day begins the evening before. So we are essentially, when we miss the Saturday service, the evening service, we are just coming very, very late to the liturgy, very, very late to the service, the Sunday services. And so a lot of people don't have that perspective. They think that, it isn't Sunday, Saturday evening, but this is the way we should be looking at it.
Well, the other thing that bothers me is when people decide they're going to travel on Sunday. It's a real sore spot for me. Why would you ever think to travel on a Sunday and miss the liturgy? And we've had several of those of our people this summer doing that, and I've not been kind about that, and I'm not going to change my position on that. And nothing takes the place of Sunday. You can't go on, well, I'm on a Thursday. No, that doesn't take the place of Sunday. Nothing takes the place of Sunday. And people need to think of those things. We have people shift work here in Las Vegas, and there's opportunities to be here, and you can work that out. So
yeah. This last question I'll ask you, Vladyka. What are your thoughts on the relations between the Russian and the Greek churches today?
Yeah. Well, I'm going to give you my personal take on this. It's a little more complicated, maybe controversial in my answer. I don't care about that so much. I think that egos got in the way in the broader spectrum of orthodoxy. I know there was a lot of talk at one time about, the Russian church becoming the first because it's the largest and most powerful church, and pushing Constantinople down the road. And my feeling was always, I don't agree with a lot of things that the Greek church does. Certainly not in their discipline and in the services, etc. But, you have a patriarch in Constantinople who has nothing. There's very few Greeks in Constantinople, in Turkey anymore. I don't even call it Istanbul. It's Constantinople. Most of the Orthodox there are Russian. But you've got a patriarch who's locked up. You can't even walk on the streets freely. So that's the Church of St. John Chrysostom. Let it stay in its position of honor. And then you have a patriarch of Constantinople who then decides that in order to make him bigger and have more, goes around dividing churches in Estonia, in Ukraine, which is awful. We have this war going on there. It was all manifested by the U.S. government because it's anti-Russian. And we've got millions of people dead now and displaced. And how long is it going to take to put that back together? Nothing churchly about any of that. But the church was involved in that, and that doesn't make it right. So my take on that is not very positive. We bishops can't serve with the bishops of the other churches. We don't allow our priests to serve with them, although that's being, no one's following that rule everywhere. That's just not the case. We don't stop the people from going to the other churches, but it has to be resolved. And how is that going to happen? You've got to just bite your tongue and accept a little bit of humility and agree to it on both sides, the Russian side and the Greek side. So that's my thought. We don't have relations with other Orthodox churches here in Las Vegas because of me. And that's why we don't participate in Sunday of Orthodoxy, because you can't go where Bishop Nikolai is. It's the same kind of thing. I've mentioned this before, and again, it's a bothersome thing to me. We were the only Orthodox church that stayed open during COVID. There were 10 other clergy here in town. Not one of them came and said, "Oh, Vladyka, would you mind if I came and just attended a service? Or if I came and prayed in the church?" Not one of them called. But none of them ever called either when I was diagnosed with terminal cancer. So what would you expect? Then you want to know how grounded are you in becoming a priest? Look at what's serving you, and then you see where it's at. It's a story that I told in Fresno, California, many years ago. The priest died. He was actually a priest in my parish when I was growing up. And so I had a Greek priest here who wasn't serving in the parish, who could serve for me. So I went once a month to Fresno to serve. And the chief judge of the local jurisdiction there was Serbian Orthodox, George Zenovich, I think. And during the course of my visits there, the church started filling up and things were very positive. And he offered me the job as the chief probation officer because I was working for probation here. And I just started the new parish and I couldn't do that. And so my last Sunday there, I said to the parish, and they'd been working on me for a long time. I said, how many of you, now there were pews, remember, they're all sitting down. I said, how many of you would like to have a new priest? Raise your hand. They're all raising their hands. How many of you would like to have a young priest, American born? Raise your hands. They're all getting excited. They broke me, right? And I said, how many of you would be willing to send your sons to seminary? There wasn't one hand up, not one eye looked up. Years later, a young man from that parish went to seminary and is a priest now in my hometown in Butte, Montana, and has done an exemplary job. But it took time for that seed to bear fruit. So good things will come. We have to wait sometimes. Even this situation we have to wait for. The Serbian church was split for 30 years. Rokor was 70 years, divided from the mother church in Russia. God's time is unlimited, not our time. So hopefully it'll be resolved. And I think we're going to close with this segment. Thank you, Rocky. He said so too. Anything you want to say?
No.
Thanks for coming to me. Thank me for coming to your program.
Thank you, Vladyka. We enjoyed you.
Okay. And also for further questions, there's going to be a pop-up on the screen. And in the comments section, you can also ask your questions, and we'll incorporate it as time goes on. So please do that. Keeps us busy.
I have a lighthearted question, actually. If a priest or a bishop offers you a coffee or a drink, is it already blessed, or do you bless it again, or?
It depends how he gives it to you.
Okay.
Yeah. From my hand, it's blessed.
Okay.
You had a blessed ginger beer. The coffee Father Dimitri gave me, I had to bless. But I blessed his too, so. Our intention for the next taping is going to continue more with my life in particular, talking about my parishes where I served, and then to move into Alaska, and then finally coming back to Las Vegas, where we are here, in more particular terms. So it should be a little more interesting to see, how do you start a parish? What do you look for? Where are those parishes at today? I think those things might be kind of interesting for some folks. We'll all pretend that this is very interesting, right?
Right.